For years, officers Troy Dalton and Rick Mason abused their power every stop, a setup, every complaint erased every victim too scared to speak. Until one freezing winter night, they picked the wrong woman. She was just walking her German Shepherd through the snow. They mocked her, they pushed her, and when her dog stepped forward to protect her, one of them pulled the trigger and they laughed. What they didn't know is that this woman is nothing like the victims they're used to, and soon they'll wish they had never crossed her path. Before we continue, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the truth that comes next. Winter pressed heavily over the small Colorado town, the cold air rolling in slow waves that blurred the distant mountains. Sarah Hale walked along the narrow snow-covered sidewalk with a steady, unhurried pace, her breath rising in pale mist. At 38, she carried the quiet presence of someone who had already lived several lifetimes. She stood a little over 5'7", slender, but toned her shoulders straight as if shaped permanently by discipline. Her dark brown hair, streaked with a few early strands of silver, earned through hardship rather than age, was tied back in a low utilitarian knot. Her olive-toned skin had the faint roughness of sun and wind from years spent outdoors, and her gray-green eyes held a calm depth that rarely revealed more than she intended. Dressed in a worn gray hoodie, faded jeans and old winter boots, scuffed from years of use, she appeared to be nothing more than an ordinary woman returning from an evening walk. She preferred it that way. Beside her trotted Bear, her 8-year-old German Shepherd, his thick black and tan coat dusted with fresh snowflakes. He was large, muscular, and carried himself with effortless confidence, moving in sync with her steps as though their bodies shared the same rhythm. A small scar ran across his left shoulder, barely visible now, but a permanent reminder of a past that had stitched the two of them together. Bear glanced up at her occasionally, his amber eyes warm yet vigilant, always tracking the space ahead, always reading the world for threats that might come too close. He had been trained for obedience and alertness, but what bound him to Sarah was deeper than training something forged long before Colorado's winter claimed the town. Sarah inhaled the sharp cold, letting it bite into her lungs. She liked the quiet. The snow softened the world, muffling footsteps, muting distant cars, leaving only the steady beat of her boots and Bear's paws pressing into the powder. It was the first time in months she felt something close to peace, though peace always sat awkwardly on her shoulders like a coat she hadn't worn in years. The road ahead curved, illuminated by a row of flickering streetlights. A police cruiser emerged from the haze, rolling slowly, tires crunching against the icy pavement. Sarah felt Bear stiffen half a second before the cruiser stopped directly in front of them. 2 officers stepped out. The first was Officer Troy Dalton, around 40 tall, with a broad chest. He pushed forward as if his ego needed the room. His jaw was square but softened by the beginnings of a double chin, and his sandy blonde hair was shaved too close, exposing the reddish undertone of his scalp. His eyes, a watery blue, carried a habitual arrogance, an expression formed from years of exerting power in small places over people who couldn't fight back. He was the kind of man who mistook fear for respect. The second was Officer Rick Mason, younger, perhaps mid-30s, lean but tense like a coiled wire. His hair was pitch black, slicked back with too much gel contrasting sharply with his pale skin. A short stubble shadowed his angular jaw, and his dark eyes held something colder than indifference, an enjoyment of situations where he could exert quiet cruelty. He wasn't loud like Troy. He didn't need to be. He had the face of a man who liked watching others squirm. Sarah paused, keeping her posture relaxed, although her senses sharpened instantly. Bear moved half a step forward, positioning himself between her and the 2 men, yet staying calm, not aggressive. Troy scanned her from head to toe, his lip curling. "What are you doing out here dressed like that?" he asked, voice dripping disdain. "Looks like you don't have a job that keeps you too busy, huh?" Sarah answered evenly. "Just walking my dog." Mason snorted, stepping closer. "Dog like that woman like you." He tilted his head, smirking. "Doesn't match up." Sarah felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the old instinct to assess distance timing angles, but she forced her voice to remain steady. "He's trained. Please don't approach him." The request, mild and respectful, had the opposite effect. Troy's ego flared at the hint of being told what not to do. Trained, he mocked. By who you? He moved closer intentionally, crossing the boundary she had drawn. Bear lowered his head ears up, stance tense but controlled. Sarah whispered, "Easy, Bear." Mason laughed under his breath. Bet the mutt's the only one who listens to her. Something in Sarah's eyes shifted just slightly, but Mason caught it and seemed pleased by the flicker of emotion. Troy tapped the grip of his gun casually. Let's see how protective this thing really is. Everything inside Sarah snapped to high alert. She opened her mouth. Don't, but the crack of the gunshot cut her off. It split the night open, echoing off frozen houses. Snow burst upward as Bear stumbled, his body twisting unnaturally before collapsing into the whiteness. The sound he made, a short, broken whine, sliced through Sarah's chest like a blade. She dropped to her knees, hands reaching for him, her breath shaking violently as her fingers touched the thick fur, already warming the snow beneath them with blood. Bear's amber eyes trembled, searching for her, terrified, yet trusting. She cupped his face, murmuring something, though even she didn't hear her own words. Then she lifted her head. The two officers were laughing. Their breath curled in the icy air, their silhouettes blurred in the falling snow, their amusement sharp and cruel. And Sarah, still kneeling, still shaking, felt something deep inside her go utterly terrifyingly still. The chapter ends as she stares into Bear's fading eyes, not knowing if the next breath he takes will be his last. The night swallowed the town. By the time the ambulance arrived, its red light spinning silently against the falling snow, as if afraid to break the fragile stillness of the street. Sarah watched them lift Bear's limp body onto the stretcher. His thick, black and tan fur was matted with dried blood, his breath shallow and uneven. The medics moved quickly, but their eyes held the grim understanding that time was slipping fast. One of them, a middle-aged man named Dr. Jeremy Collins, wore a navy winter jacket with a patch from the local veterinary clinic. He was in his early 50s, short and sturdy, with a round face framed by gray stubble and gentle eyes that softened even further when he looked at Bear. "We'll do everything we can," he said quietly, his voice firm yet compassionate. Sarah only nodded, unable to trust her voice. She crouched beside the stretcher, placing a trembling hand on Bear's shoulder. The dog's eyelids fluttered weakly at her touch. She whispered something into his fur, something the icy wind carried away before even she fully heard it. Troy Dalton and Rick Mason stood behind her, their breath curling in the air, the metallic scent of gunpowder still clinging to the cold atmosphere. They didn't look remorseful. If anything, they seemed irritated at the paperwork this would now require. Troy smirked, tapping one gloved finger against the handcuffs clipped to his belt. "All right, enough of that. Turn around." Sarah did not move immediately. Her mind was a locked vault, her breath slow, her posture unnaturally still. But when she rose, her expression revealed nothing, not grief, not rage, only a silence, so controlled it felt dangerous. Troy grabbed her wrist, roughly twisting it behind her back. The bite of steel cuffs closed around her wrists. Snow bit into her knees as he shoved her forward. Rick watched with a crooked grin, shifting his weight lazily, as if enjoying the spectacle. They pushed her into the back of the cruiser, slamming the door hard enough that the window shuddered. Through the glass, smeared with condensation, she watched Bear disappear into the red haze of the ambulance lights. Something inside her chest twisted sharply like a mountain cracking under pressure. The drive to the station was suffocatingly quiet. Sarah focused on her breathing, counting each inhale to stop her mind from fracturing. She had seen men die. She had held dying teammates in deserts and mountains half a world away. But Bear, his pain, cut deeper than bullets ever had. At the station, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, harsh and unfriendly. The air smelled of stale coffee, cheap disinfectant, and uniforms that hadn't been washed properly. Troy dragged her through the hallway as though parading a trophy. Rick followed behind with that same cold smirk. They shoved her into the holding room, small, gray, and windowless. The metal chair scraped the floor as Sarah sat, the cuffs still tight. Troy leaned back against the wall with an exaggerated sigh. "So," he said, "what's someone like you doing, walking around with a dog like that?" His tone was mocking, the question meant to provoke. Sarah stared at the table. She didn't blink. Rick raised a brow. Maybe she's one of those people who talks big, but has nothing going for her. He circled the room slowly like a predator, savoring the discomfort of its prey. Or maybe she's just another stray in this town. Sarah said nothing. Her silence irritated Troy, who slammed his palm on the table. Look at me when I'm talking to you. She lifted her eyes. They were calm, too calm. And for a brief second, something flickered in Troy's expression, a ripple of uncertainty, as if he sensed there was more to this woman than the hoodie jeans and snow-soaked boots suggested. But the moment passed. He cleared his throat, covering his unease with arrogance. Your dog attacked us, he declared loudly. We acted in self-defense. That's the report. Rick nodded, adding, and you resisted. So that's going in too. Their voices washed over her like distant static. What held her mind captive was the memory of Bear collapsing, the weight of his body going slack against the snow. She replayed the moment over and over, each time feeling her breath tighten until she thought she might choke. Hours passed. The station quieted. A thin line of pale dawn crept under the door, staining the floor with weak light. The door finally opened, revealing a woman in a long black coat dusted with frost. Her dark hair, sleek and pulled into a low bun, contrasted sharply with her pale, sharp features. Her eyes, deep brown and fiercely intelligent, narrowed as she took in the sight of Sarah in handcuffs. Emma Hale. Sarah's older sister by 3 years was a federal investigative attorney known for her unyielding demeanor and razor-sharp mind. She was shorter than Sarah, but possessed a command over her surroundings that needed no height to reinforce. Her voice cut through the stale air like a blade. Remove the cuffs. Now. Troy hesitated. Now, Emma repeated, her tone so authoritative it snapped through the room like a whip. Troy fumbled with the keys, unlocking Sarah's wrists while avoiding Emma's glare. Sarah rubbed the raw skin where the metal had dug in. Emma turned to Rick, her expression colder than the morning wind. I've reviewed your report, she said. You claim the dog attacked. Rick straightened defensively. It did. Interesting, Emma replied, her voice icy calm, because the traffic camera that should have captured the entire incident went offline exactly 3 minutes before the shooting. A coincidence? Or sabotage? Troy stiffened. It was maintenance. Emma stepped forward inches from him. At 2 o'clock in the morning during a snowstorm, he had no answer. Sarah watched her sister defend her with a mixture of gratitude and quiet sorrow. Emma didn't know who Sarah truly was, not the missions, not the shadows, not the scars. She only knew the sister she had grown up with, not the warrior the world had forced her to become. When they finally reached the veterinary clinic, Sarah sat beside Bear's fragile body. His breaths came in uneven waves, chest rising and falling with visible effort. She ran her fingers through his fur, feeling the dried blood, the cold patches where snow had melted. Her hands trembled, but her eyes remained terrifyingly calm. Something deep within her, a place she had locked away long ago, opened like a creaking door. A dark room she hoped never to enter again. A room filled with the cost of violence. And now it invited her back. The winter sun barely rose the next morning, a pale smear of light hidden behind thick gray clouds. The cold had sharpened overnight, freezing the trees until their branches glittered like glass. Inside the small veterinary clinic, Sarah sat beside Bear's metal recovery cot, watching the slow rise and fall of his chest. His breathing was shallow, but more stable now. Dr. Jeremy Collins, with his round, tired face and graying beard, had spent the entire night working on Bear. The bags under his gentle eyes spoke of exhaustion, but he still checked Bear's IV line with the soft professionalism of someone who had saved countless animals. When he finally stepped back, he spoke in a lowered voice, as if afraid to disturb Sarah's fragile calm. He's alive, he said, but weak, very weak. The bullet missed his vitals by sheer luck. Sarah nodded once. Her shoulders lowered an inch, but her face remained expressionless. Her olive-toned skin looked paler than usual, almost as if the cold had seeped into her very bones. Her gray-green eyes, normally soft and warm when she was with Bear, were vacant, now silent, calculating, wounded in a way that seemed to sink inward rather than lash out. She rested her hand on Bear's fur, lightly tracing the warm patches where the blankets covered him. Her fingers trembled despite her stillness. The trembling was not fear. Fear was something she had learned to silence long ago. This was something far more dangerous, grief sharpening into purpose. Emma arrived later that afternoon. Her dark hair was still tied tightly from the morning's court appearance, her black wool coat dusted with flurries that had followed her from the parking lot. Her sharply structured face softened only slightly when she saw Sarah. "He's stable," Emma said quietly, eyes scanning the monitors. "Dr. Collins told me." Sarah nodded but didn't look away from Bear. Emma exhaled the breath, heavy with frustration. "Sarah. The department isn't going to cooperate. Their internal report clears those two officers. They're calling it self-defense. They expect this to go away." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Emma continued, "I'll push the federal inquiry as far as I can, but without footage from the street camera." "It was shut off," Sarah said softly. Emma paused. "Yes, and the official explanation is maintenance malfunction." Sarah knew better. Cameras did not malfunction at the exact second a bullet was fired, unless someone wanted them to. Sarah remained beside Bear until Emma left for Denver. When the clinic quieted and the blizzard outside began to settle, she finally stood. She placed one last hand on Bear's head, whispering something only he would understand. Then she left the room, silently moving through the hall, like a shadow, returning to its origin. That night, the town sank into the heavy quiet of winter. Snowflakes drifted from the sky like falling ash. Sarah stepped out into the cold with her hood pulled low, her breath fogging in steady, controlled patterns. Her boots left faint impressions in the fresh snow prints that disappeared quickly as the wind swept across the streets. She didn't walk toward home. She walked toward purpose. The first step of her silent hunt began with the police cruiser logs she had memorized earlier that day while being processed through the station. Every movement of Troy Dalton and Rick Mason, every street they patrolled, every alley they loitered in, was now a pattern she could trace. Dalton lived in a one-story house at the edge of town, a place cluttered with hunting trophies visible through the windows and a truck with oversized tires parked in the driveway. He was the kind of man who believed dominating animals made him powerful. His house was dark when Sarah reached it, the streetlight flickering above, as if trying to warn someone too stubborn to listen. Her footsteps were soundless as she approached. She didn't get close enough to be caught on the camera near his porch. Instead, she stood just far enough that the motion light wouldn't trigger. She left one single trail of footprints leading toward his door, and another leading away intentionally, slow, deliberate, unmistakably human. When Dalton opened his door the next morning and saw the prints, he felt the sting of unease prickle at his spine. But the real message waited for him at the edge of his fence, 5 long boot prints spaced evenly, the sign of someone trained to move quietly, efficiently, confidently, someone unafraid to be seen. Dalton swallowed hard, scanning the empty street. No figure, no witness, only snow. Sarah, meanwhile, moved on. Rick Mason was harder to track, not because he was careful, but because he lived a fragmented life. His small apartment was a mess of unwashed dishes, empty beer bottles, and piles of newspapers. His hair, usually slicked back, was disheveled when he walked to his car at night, glancing nervously at the shadows. Rick had always liked control, but now he felt watched. Sarah observed him from a distance that only someone with experience could measure perfectly close enough to track him far enough to remain unseen. She watched him meet a group of men in a dark alley behind a shuttered hardware store. They were rough-looking, thick jackets and aggressive postures, men who smelled of minor criminal activity, likely informants, the kind cops like Rick manipulated for favors. Rick spoke in a hushed tone, constantly glancing over his shoulder. His breath came out in visible bursts, too quick for the mild cold. One of the men leaned toward him, whispering something. Rick's stiffened eyes scanning the dark. "Someone's been following me," he muttered. His voice shook. The men laughed at first, but the laughter faded when they saw his expression. Rick looked into the swirling snowfall, trying to pierce the shadows, but Sarah had already moved. Every night after that, she left subtle signs, nothing overt, just enough to erode their certainty, a hacked traffic camera, blinking in their patrol zone tire tracks, that appeared behind them, though no car had been seen. A faint glint of something metallic on a rooftop. Rick's breathing grew uneven at the slightest sound. Dalton slept with the lights on. Both of them felt it now, pressure tightening like a noose. One night, Rick whispered to Dalton in the patrol car, his voice trembling, "Someone's hunting us." Dalton scoffed. "Who?" Rick swallowed. I don't know. But it's not normal, not random." Snow hit the windshield in thick sheets. The world outside was black and white, snow and shadow. Dalton muttered, "Then let them come." But his voice lacked conviction. Sarah Hale walked the streets that night, like the winter itself, cold, silent, inevitable. They had wanted to show her she was powerless. Instead, they had woken something they could never hope to outrun. The wind carved its way through the empty industrial district, a low moan slipping between the abandoned warehouses as snow drifted across the cracked asphalt. The night felt hollow, like the world itself was holding its breath. Sarah stepped into the shadows behind a rusted loading ramp, her charcoal gray hoodie blending seamlessly with the icy gloom. Her figure, lean and tightly controlled, moved with a fluidity that did not belong to an ordinary woman. The pale glow of the street lamp caught the faint strands of her dark brown hair escaping from beneath her hood and illuminated the cold edge of her eyes, green-gray unblinking, locked on a single point across the street. That point was Troy Dalton. Troy staggered out of O'Hara's bar, his heavy boots crunching against the frozen ground. He was a big man with a thick neck and wide shoulders, the type who grew up lifting hay bales on a farm before discovering the thrill of authority behind a badge. His square jaw was darkened by a rough, uneven beard, and the bridge of his nose had a crookedness suggesting old bar fights. He reeked of beer and arrogance. This was his comfort zone, dark corners, where he could threaten people without witnesses. His breath fogged the air in short, careless bursts. When he spotted the silhouette across the alley, he laughed a harsh, mocking sound that echoed against the metal siding of the warehouse. "Well, look who it is," Troy slurred, spreading his arms as if greeting an old friend. "The woman with the mutt, or what's left of it." Sarah didn't move. The stillness of her body, the steady rhythm of her breath, it unnerved him more than he wanted to admit. His bravado swelled to compensate. "What gonna cry, gonna beg me for an apology?" He spat on the snow. "You and that filthy dog should have known better." Sarah's voice emerged low and leveled, calm enough to unsettle. "You shouldn't have come out alone tonight." Troy barked a laugh. "You threatening me, sweetheart? I'm the law in this town." "No," she said softly. "You were." Before Troy registered the shift, she moved. A single fluid step, then a twist, her elbow slicing upward with the precision of a blade. It struck beneath his ribs, knocking the air from his lungs. He folded forward instinctively, and she stepped past him, pivoting with the balanced grace of someone who had learned to fight in places where hesitation meant death. Her heel swept behind his knee, and Troy dropped onto the snow. What he gasped, reaching for his belt. Her hand intercepted his wrist, slamming it against the ice. Pain shot through him, and he cried out, more shocked than hurt. Sarah crouched beside him, her expression unreadable. "You didn't kill a dog, Troy," she said quietly, her breath visible in the cold. "You killed a soldier." He froze. Something in her tone, something carved from steel and memory, stripped him of every scrap of his swagger. For the first time, fear crawled up his spine. But before he could speak, she released him and vanished into the alley, leaving him on his hands and knees trembling. 3 days later, in a dimly lit parking garage beneath the Westbrook Mall, Rick Mason wiped his hands on his jacket nervously. The shadows pooled thick between the concrete pillars. His sharp, angular face twitched each time a car rolled past above. Unlike Troy, Rick was smaller but wiry, his movements quick and alert. His close-cropped blonde hair and cold blue eyes gave him the look of a man always calculating risk. He had grown up the son of an alcoholic father who taught him early that control came from striking first. Rick lived by that rule: hurt or intimidate before being hurt. But now his hands trembled slightly. Someone had been leaving signs, footprints in the snow near his apartment, a small dent on his car door, the faint click of a camera shutting down at the exact moment he passed under it. He hadn't slept in 2 nights. The echo of footsteps made him whirl around. Sarah stepped from behind a column. Her hood was down this time, and the stark overhead light revealed her face, clearly angular cheekbones, a straight nose, and eyes that held the stillness of someone who measured life in seconds and decisions. Rick's breath hitched. "You," he hissed. "You shot first." She replied, her tone quiet, but carrying across the concrete. He backed up instinctively, bumping against the hood of his car. "Stay back," he warned, fumbling for his weapon. But she was already there. She seized his wrist, twisting. The gun clattered to the floor. Rick yelled the sound, bouncing harshly off the garage walls. "You beat a man once, because he asked for a lawyer." Sarah said, her voice steady. "You shoved a teenager because he refused to put his hands higher. You laughed while Bear bled out in the snow." Her grip tightened. "You hide behind a badge. That ends now." "Are you gonna kill me?" Rick spat through clenched teeth. "No," she answered. "You don't deserve that kind of ending." She released him with a final shove. Rick crumpled beside his car, breathing hard, pupils wide with terror. She turned and walked away, boots clicking softly against the concrete. Behind her, Rick's voice cracked into the darkness. "Who are you?" Sarah didn't answer. 2 nights later, the truth began to rise. In living rooms across the town, phones buzzed, news alerts pinged. Videos appeared on social media, grainy but clear enough. Troy and Rick entering Sarah's home without a warrant, swinging their fists, smirking as they stood over Bear's bleeding body. Their falsified reports, their threats, their cruelty. The town erupted. Protesters gathered in the snowy streets. Cameras rolled. Reporters demanded explanations. The police chief struggled to speak over the roaring storm of public outrage. And Sarah Hale, standing in the quiet of her sister's kitchen, watched it unfold without a word. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She only murmured, "Truth has its own gravity. Once released, nothing can stop it." Outside, the winter wind screamed through the trees as if echoing her words. The storm that had shaken the small Colorado town had not come from the mountains, but from the truth, and now it spread across the entire state like a crack through ice. By the time the morning sun rose behind the courthouse, the snow on the steps had been trampled flat by reporters, activists, local families, and strangers who had driven for hours to witness the hearing. The air was sharp with cold, but also with something electric anticipation. Sarah Hale walked up those steps with a stillness that contrasted sharply with the chaos around her. She wore a simple black coat, the collar raised to shield her neck from the winter wind. Her tall, slender frame remained steady, her dark brown hair tucked behind her ears. Her face, usually calm, unreadable, held a hint of exhaustion, but also a quiet defiance carved by countless battles, most of them never acknowledged by the world. At her side, Bear limped weakly, wrapped in a soft gray support harness. His once vigorous stride was now careful, each step deliberate, but his eyes, warm, intelligent, amber brown, never left her. 8 years of missions had bonded them, but this moment, this walk into the courthouse, felt like the heaviest they had ever taken together. Inside the courtroom buzzed with low voices. Rows of strangers waited, some clutching handmade signs, demanding accountability. Cameras clicked. The judge, an older man named Harold Kavanaugh, sat stern and upright. His white beard trimmed his tannish skin, weathered by decades of delivering verdicts no one else wanted to carry. He had the hardened gaze of someone who had seen institutions fail too many times. Sarah sat in the front row beside Emma Hale, her sister. Emma's tailored navy suit gave her the air of someone used to federal hearing rooms, but today there was tenderness in her posture. She leaned ever so slightly towards Sarah, ready to speak if she needed strength. The courtroom doors opened again. 2 deputies escorted Troy Dalton and Rick Mason to the defense table. Troy looked smaller, without his uniform, hunched inside a county-issue shirt, his broad shoulders no longer filled with bravado. Dark bruises marked his cheekbones. His perpetually confident smirk had collapsed into a stiff, nervous frown. Rick appeared even worse, eyes, hollow posture, rigid. The trembling in his fingers betrayed sleepless nights and a mind fraying at the edges. His blonde hair was unkempt, his complexion ashen. He refused to glance at the crowd, at Emma, or at Sarah, especially at Sarah. The prosecutor, a composed woman named Dana Whitlock, mid-40s, short black hair, sharp jawline, began the proceedings. Her voice was steady, clipped, nothing wasted. She presented everything: the body cam failures, the falsified reports, witness testimony, the clandestine footage exposing their intrusions, their sneers, their laughter at Bear's collapse. The courtroom watched, breaths held tight. Rick clenched the edge of his table until his knuckles whitened. Troy stared at the floor, blinking rapidly as each video played. When it was time for Sarah to testify, the room shifted into a rare kind of silence, heavy, expectant. She walked to the stand. Her boots clicked quietly. Bear lay down near her seat with a soft groan, and she rested her fingertips briefly on his head before sitting straight, hands folded in her lap. Her voice when she spoke was steady but low, carrying the weight of a woman who had run out of illusions long ago. "I did not provoke them," she said. "I did not resist. My dog did not attack." He stepped forward because he sensed danger. He always did. Dana nodded. "And what happened after that?" Sarah hesitated for a fraction of a second, the only sign of the wound still bleeding beneath her ribs. "They shot him," she said, and they laughed. A murmur rippled through the crowd, quickly silenced by the judge. Sarah continued, slowly measured. "They didn't see a person. They didn't see a living being. They saw targets. And when they realized I wasn't the easy one they thought I was..." She inhaled, her jaw tightening slightly. "They tried to bury the truth." Emma watched her sister with a clenched jaw, pride and sorrow tangled in her eyes. Troy shifted uncomfortably, staring at his shackled hands. Rick blinked repeatedly, his throat bobbing. When the closing arguments ended, Judge Kavanaugh leaned forward, fingers interlocking. A hush fell. Gregory Troy Dalton. Richard Allen Mason. His voice was deep, solemn, echoing through the courtroom like wind through canyon walls. "You abused your authority. You falsified evidence. You endangered lives. You inflicted harm without remorse. You violated the trust this state placed in you." He paused long enough for the weight of his words to sink into the marrow of the room. "For these crimes, excessive force, unlawful discharge of a firearm, falsification of official documents, and endangerment of public safety, I sentence you both to 25 years in federal custody without the possibility of parole." A gasp moved through the courtroom like the shiver of an avalanche. Troy's eyes widened. Rick's lips parted in disbelief before he lowered his face and covered it with his hands. Sarah did not move. Not a blink, not a twitch. Just a long, slow exhale. When she stepped out of the courthouse minutes later, the air outside carried the metallic scent of approaching snow. Reporters surrounded her instantly, shouting questions into the crisp wind. One voice rose above the rest. "Miss Hale, do you have any final words for the defendants?" Sarah paused. Snowflakes drifted around her, settling softly onto her gloved palm. She watched one melt slowly, fragile but real, then lifted her gaze toward the crowd. "They thought I was just an ordinary woman," she said quietly. "They were wrong." She knelt beside Bear, whose ears perked weakly, leaning into her touch. "Justice comes late sometimes," she whispered, stroking his fur, "but it comes." Behind her, the courthouse doors swung closed. Ahead, the winter snow fell with a calm that felt like a final verdict, closing one story and opening the first quiet chapter of healing. Sometimes, justice arrives like a quiet snowfall, late, gentle, but undeniably real. And sometimes, in the hardest winters of our lives, God sends us small miracles, disguised as courage, loyalty, or even a wounded German shepherd who refuses to give up. Sarah's fight wasn't just about punishment. It was about reminding us that light still rises after darkness, and that no cruelty can overshadow the truth forever. As you go through your own days, your storms, your battles, may you remember that God walks beside those who stand for what is right. If this story touched your heart, please share it, leave a comment, and subscribe to our channel so these messages of hope can reach even farther. And may God bless every one of you watching today and always.